As that song said, the cross has already won the war, and greater is the one that's inside of you. We're going to see that today. Are we living like that one that's inside of us? Are we living with that light? Or are we living a lot more like the world in our life? Most of you guys stayed home last Sunday. I suppose you were worried about the snow, and so you just called off the service. Little did you know, we were out skiing during the snow. We had a fresh new 3 inches of snow at that little place that we were skiing. It was our first time ever to go skiing. Some of us participated a little bit more than the others did, but it was all fun. It was good. I had a great time. I'm already looking forward to going back and making plans for that myself to do that. I told some of you Wednesday about that, but the day before, last Saturday, we went to the Creation Museum. So I guess the family, they just went along with me. They were good sports about the whole weekend, and you called off the service and everything. So no harm, no foul. Everybody's good. We're just going to pick back up in Genesis. But while we were at the Creation Museum, buddy, we saw a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. We saw they have life-size dinosaurs there. They have skeletons of the dinosaurs. You could make it through. It's about a 5-hour trip. You can make it through the museum in a day. You can watch the shows they have and still have a good educational experience while you're there and see it all in one day. I would highly encourage you to do that. Take a part of what they've offered. They will be offering the Ark. That's about a 45-minute drive away. It's a completely separate thing. But the life-size version of the Ark will be on display starting July the 6th or 7th, something along there. The middle of summer will be that Ark. Like I said, it's about 45 minutes south of where the Creation Museum is. But you walk through there, you see all of these things that we have been talking about on Sunday mornings and especially Sunday evenings, and you put this puzzle together in your mind and you kind of see, this makes sense. This makes sense. And you say, well, I don't know if I'll ever need this. Let me tell you, you need this. You need this equipping. You need this training because there are people everywhere. You are really a minority when you believe the Word of God and that God created it in 6 days. You go to a school, you go to elementary school, you go to a university, you are going to find instructors, teachers that are going to teach evolution, and you are not going to have a leg to stand on. All you're going to do is say, well, I just don't believe that. And they're going to ask you to support why you don't believe that, and you will not have an answer. And they will beat you up, they will beat you down, they will make you feel inferior. So if you haven't been listening to the messages we've been bringing, we started this in January, I believe. You can see Chad. We've recorded them. Take them home. We've had a couple of snow days, so maybe you haven't missed that much. But we need to have a grasp. If we do not grasp Genesis chapter 1 and we think it to be myth or fable or not true, then I do not understand how we can trust the rest of the Bible. You can't. You have to come to grip with Genesis chapter 1 before you can ever move to the rest of the Bible. So Genesis chapter 5 today, we're moving along. I hope you have a pen or a pencil with you. I hope you brought your textbook to class today. I hope you brought the Bible with you, whether in print form or digital form. Either way, that's fine. Take out a pen, a paper. You'll probably want to make some notes. You'll probably want to jot some things down in the side margin of your Bible to remember. And we can't grow deep in our belief by plowing shallow. Why do we spend so much time? Why are we on our second month now and we're going into our third month on the study of Genesis? Why do we spend so much time in a series? You know, most times, and I really don't know what else you want me to preach or teach you. If I come up here and I open up Cosmopolitan or the National Enquirer, then you need to tell me not to come back anymore. But as long as I'm bringing the Bible to teach out of, then we're in pretty good shape. But most people say that the attention span of a congregation, you can't teach. You cannot teach. I don't use very good English or grammar sometimes, but you cannot teach over 3 or 4 messages on one topic because the congregation will lose interest. Their mind will begin to wander. They'll drift off. But you can't grow deep by plowing shallow. That's why we spend time on these series, on these books. That's why we dig in and we dig deep. There are enough shallow Christians running around on the outside of this building, so let's dig deep. Just a brief recap, very brief. We have talked about creation. We have talked briefly about 1 or 2 of the days in creation. We have talked about God making man, Adam naming the animals that God brought before him. We've talked a little bit about Eve as well. Isha is her Hebrew name. Ish is man. Isha is woman or out of man, I believe, but that's her Hebrew name. We talked about the last 2 weeks ago, we talked about what took place in the garden as the serpent lured them in to eating of that tree, and what happened? He bailed. He was gone. But who was there? God. God was there. That was the big point from 2 weeks ago. So we have Adam and Eve. They have eaten from the tree, and what does Adam? They realize they are naked. So what does Adam do? Adam tries to, well, we're naked. Adam tries to do what? They try to cover themselves up. And how do they do that? They fashion together some fig leaves. Now, have any of you ever seen fig leaves? Some of you are shaking your head. You have. To my knowledge, I don't know that I have. I didn't even look up a picture, but reading about them this week, and if you have seen or felt of a fig leaf, what I read was it could possibly be one of the coarsest leaves to touch that there is. I see you shaking your head. It is a coarse leaf. Now think about that. Think about that. Man, I'm thinking Adam was a pretty smart fella. He was the original guy that God created. God created him, and he said it was good. But think about Adam. In man's own ability, he takes a fig leaf that might have probably, you say, and agree with, that it was a coarse leaf, and he fashions that to go up against his body. That's the best man could come up with. The best man could come up with was a coarse, rough leaf to put against his naked body to shield him. And what does God say? God says, that will not do. I will make something better for you. There must be a blood sacrifice for atonement. And what does God do? God takes something probably much more softer. In God's knowledge, He takes something that man has already messed up. God makes it better. God atones for it. God makes a way. And if we wanted to, we don't have time today, but we could see. I believe Adam and Eve are in heaven. I believe they accepted God. The offering that God made for them, that they then made these offerings to God. We can see that because Adam and Eve taught their children. We can see that when Cain and Abel come to make their offering, that one brings an offering of a sacrifice, the other one brings, so they knew that an offering had to be brought for a sacrifice to God. Where did they learn that? Mom and Dad taught them that. So man in his own ability didn't do a very good job fashioning something together, but God comes in, says there will be a blood sacrifice. Adam and Eve have a couple of children. You know them, Cain and Abel. And through those two children, we have the first fatality. We have the first death. Cain kills Abel. Abel is out of the picture. They have another child, Seth. Now, in your study of Genesis, you may want to know, well, it says Cain left, he moved on, and took his wife. He took his wife to the place that he went. It's not that he met his wife when he got there. He took his wife. So your question is, where did he get his wife? That's one of the most asked questions as you study Genesis. Where did Cain, where did possibly Abel, where did Seth get their wife? Because if you believe, like I believe, that there was just Adam and Eve, and they are just the first two people ever, and they are literal people. They are not symbolic of a group of people already on the scene, or God made multiple people, or He formed multiple people, and maybe they were on outside of the garden wall looking around and wanting in or something like that, and when they got kicked out, they were all one happy family. But no, God made Adam, God made Eve. They populated the earth. So where did Cain's wife come from? Where did Seth's wife come from? Where did any of them get their spouse from? How did God create Adam? Create him perfect. Create him without flaw. His DNA was perfect. When his DNA was perfect, that takes away all, of course, you marrying your sister or your cousin now is really outlawed. And it's because there'll be problems. There'll be problems in birth, deformed children. But when God created Adam and Eve, perfect. I heard somebody describe it like this. If you take an original copy and you lay it on that copy machine, the original copy is perfect. But when you start making a copy, you take that copy, put it back on top of that copy machine, make another copy, put it on top. What happens? It begins to get some lines in it, begins to get fuzzy. The tint in it begins to change. Jewish tradition says Adam and Eve had 33 sons and 23 daughters. It wasn't till 1500 BC that God said incest was wrong. Now, I know it's hard for us to comprehend. It's hard for us to fathom that. So that's where they got their wives from. They populated the earth. But at a time, God said this is no longer, this changes. He changed that. Genesis chapter 5, verse 1 through 3. Now, you can believe that or not. That's what I'm going with. I mean, you want to believe that, or do you want to believe you came out of the pond and you've just been involved? I mean, you tell me which is worse. Which one makes more sense to you? God created, or you walked out as a tadpole one day? Your gills closed up one day and they became lungs, or your flippers became feet and hands one day. You're not an ape. You're not a monkey. Your DNA does not match them. We've seen it. I've shown it to you. Let's move on. Verse 1. This is the book of the generation of Adam. In the day when God created man, He made him in the likeness of God. We got to stop right there. Verse 1. Who did God make Adam in the likeness of? Himself. Okay? God makes man in the likeness of Himself. He created them male and female, and He blessed them and named them man in the day when they were created. Verse 3. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness. Now, whose likeness is Adam's child? His own likeness, not in the likeness of God. What does that mean? Sin, fallen man has placed a mark on Adam and Eve's children. Adam was created in the likeness of God. Eve was created in that same likeness. Now fallen man has left a mark on his children. So he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. So Adam was made in God's image. Seth is made in Adam's image, so he bears the mark of the fall. Now, here in the start of this chapter, what do you have? You have a new birth. Why is this important? Because in chapter 4, as you come in chapter 4, you see a death. There is a death, and this death is followed up with a new birth. Do you know what Seth's name means? His name means appointed. He's named appointed because they understood that Seth would take Abel's place. He was appointed to take this place. Jesus calls Abel. You look in the New Testament and see what Jesus calls Abel. He calls him a prophet and a priest. So Seth has been appointed to take Abel's place. He will be a prophet. He will be a priest. Now, Adam and Eve, they probably thought that Seth was going to be the fulfillment of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Think about this logically. They have heard this. God has told them this. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. They were thinking, surely Seth is the one who is going to fulfill what God said. He will be the one that comes and saves. He will be the one that comes and strikes the serpent. He will be the one that does away with the serpent. So chapter 5 here in Genesis is the lineage of Seth. And through this lineage, the Messiah comes. You can see it, if you want to track it, you can see it through Mary's line, through her lineage in Luke chapter 3. But back in Genesis chapter 5, now verse 6. Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enosh. Then Seth lived 807 years after he became the father of Enosh, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Enosh lived 90 years, and he became the father of Kenan. Then Enosh lived 815 years, and he became the father of Kenan, and he had other sons and daughters. Verse 11. So all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. Now, do you notice anything in here? Do you notice a word that is repeated time and time again? Well, if you look back, starting at verse 6, Seth lived. Verse 7, Seth lived. Enosh lived. Verse 9, 10, Enosh lived. Lived. Why is that important? Why is it mentioned that way? If you turn back to chapter 4 and you look up Cain's descendants, it's never said about them. It is not said that his descendants live. What does that mean? The only people who live are the people of God. There's a difference. Our world today is full of Satan's deception, and the world today says you only live if you act like the world. So if you live apart from Christ, you are living today as a dead man walking, headed to even a deader place, if that can be possible. Apart from Christ, you are dead and you are headed to a more dead place. But the people of God are the ones who live. And he says that time and time again. Seth lived, Enosh lived, Kenan lived. Each one of them, it says how they lived. It never says Cain's descendants die either. In this lineage we see, it's mentioned they die, but here it says that Seth's descendants, they do die. Why is that important? We talk about living, why it's important. Only the people of God are the ones who are truly alive. Why does it mention death in here as well? What had Satan done? Satan had lied to them. Satan, the serpent, had said, surely you will not die. God makes it evident that death happened even to the people of God. God says, I said it, and yes, you will die. So it's highlighted here. Another reason, if you want to look at Psalm chapter 116, if you've ever been to a funeral, you've probably heard this verse read, verse 15 in Psalm 116. But it says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of His godly ones. God sees you. God knows when you die. It is important to God. He is there. He sees it. It is not hidden. You do not just pop up in front of Him one day in heaven and He says, oh boy, I didn't expect to see you today. He is aware of what is going on in your life. The people of God, it says, lived. It's important. Death, God says it will happen. And the death of the godly ones is precious in His sight. He notices. So Abel has died. He was the first death. He was the first martyr for God. Adam is the next one to die. Adam dies at 930 years old. The third person who is gone from the scene is who? Enoch. Enoch is gone. He walked with God and he was no more. He was taken up. What's God doing in all of this? He's basically populating heaven right now. Moses is writing. Why does Moses do all this? Why does the Spirit inspire Moses to write Genesis down, to write murder down, to write about a martyr down? Why does the Spirit inspire Moses to write down about these living, about the dead, about the years that they were here? Why does he do that? He wants to show the Hebrew slaves that God has a plan for you. These Hebrew slaves, God has a plan for you as well. You're not dismissed from this whole text. God had a plan for the Hebrew slaves. He's trying to show them that through Moses, God has a plan for each one of us. Now, when you come to the 7th generation of Cain and Seth, something happens. And that's what we're going to focus on. With Cain, you come to the 7th generation of Cain, and you have Lamech. Lamech could care less who knows who he killed. He would be boastful. He would be bragging. He would be puffed up. He would be proud. He would be arrogant. He could care less what you said about him or what he did. He had no fear. If there was a store, he would have robbed it. If there was something else going on, he would have done that as well. That was Lamech. He was headlong into sin and wickedness. Now, Genesis 5, verse 18 and 19. We get to the 7th generation of Seth. We're coming up to it. Jared lived 162 years and became the father of Enoch. Then Jared lived 800 years and he became the father of Enoch, and he had other sons and daughter. So Seth has Enoch. What does Enoch mean? Enoch's name means dedicated. Enoch is a prophet. He is a prophet. We thought Noah had it rough. How long was Noah a prophet? How long did Noah minister while he built that ark? Over 100 years. Enoch is a prophet, is a minister for 300 years, and not a single person comes to God. Now, you talk about being depressed. But this guy gets up every day and he preaches judgment, and nobody wants to hear it. Sounds like today, but let me tell you the half of it. We're not there yet. We're going to see that. So he's a prophet who preaches for 300 years, no response. What you have in that day and time is a wicked generation. He is, and why is that encouraging? For 300 years, Enoch is preaching judgment in a wicked generation. What does that tell you? That even in a wicked day and time, God has a man proclaiming His word. Jesus says that when He returns, the day and time in which He returns will be like the days of who? Noah. Can you believe that we're not there yet? Can you imagine how the day and time of Noah must have been if we aren't there yet and he hasn't come back? I can't imagine how much worse it has to get. Now notice the sons of Enoch, verse 21. Enoch lived, what's his name? Dedicated. He's dedicated. He's preaching judgment. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Now, if you've been here on Sunday nights, I believe, or if you've been in Sunday school class with me, you know what the name Methuselah means. I'm going to ask you if you remember. I'm just going to tell you again. Methuselah means when he dies, judgment. How would you like to have this attached to your name? What do you think everybody was doing as they were walking around? Well, there's Methuselah. His name means when he dies, judgment. Buddy, we better do our best to keep him alive. What's going to happen when he dies? So Methuselah his name means when he dies, judgment. That's what Enoch's dad has been preaching. He's been preaching judgment. Now, do you know, again, you people, some of you know what happened. What happened the very same year Methuselah, when he dies, judgment happened? You remember? The flood. How about that? That's truth. The year Methuselah dies, the flood came. You talk about judgment for the world. That was it. Just coincidence, isn't it? It's just coincidence. Yeah. Verse 22 and 24, 3-4. Then Enoch walked with God. Here, you need to highlight that, walked with God. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah. And he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Why did he die so young? Or because he was removed. Right here, verse 24. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Verse 25. Methuselah lived 187 years and became the father of Lamech. Now, this is different than Cain's Lamech. Lamech means conqueror. Again, they were looking for the conqueror to deliver them, to crush the serpent. That's what they were looking for. Now Lamech has a son, and notice what he names him, verse 28 and 29. Lamech lived 100. Now remember, who was it? Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech now. And who does Lamech have? Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Now he called his name Noah. This one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed. What does Noah's name mean? It means rest. Do you see? They are continually on the lookout for the Messiah. Maybe through Noah now, God will settle this curse. That's what they're thinking. They were continually looking for the Messiah, for the one to break this curse that they were under. In a godless generation, God has a dedicated man, Enoch, to preach judgment. What does verse 22 and 4 say? Enoch walked with God. Enoch is dedicated. Remember his name? What's it say about him? He walked with God in 24, and he was not. Verse 22, then Enoch walked with God 300 years. Enoch walked with God. He was dedicated to that. What is that? It's a picture of. Draw you a picture. This is what the picture of walking with God was. It was a picture of the high priest going behind the veil. How often did he do that? He did that once a year. But this says that Enoch walked with God. He was dedicated. He was with God. It means When the priest went behind the veil, how close was he to God? He was as close as any person on the earth at that time could be. That's why he went back there. Went back there to be in the presence of God, to give sacrifice. But this is the same illustration, same picture. Enoch walked with God. It means that he was closer to God than any other person on the planet at that time. There had to be this growing intimacy between Enoch and God. There was this dedication, as his name says. He was obedient to God. He walked with God. In all things that God said, he was obedient. Now, the name of his son was what? Methuselah. How old was Methuselah? Do you remember? 969? He was a pretty old guy when he died. Matter of fact, he was the oldest guy to die, right? Enoch, dedicated, preaching judgment. His son, when he dies, judgment. But look at this. This is the good stuff right here. Methuselah is the oldest man alive. The oldest man ever. 969 years old. When he dies, judgment. Do you again think it be coincidence that God has the man that is named when he dies, judgment, to be the oldest person ever? Do you know what that says? That tells me that God is long-suffering. God is patient with you. He's patient with the world. He's patient. He's eagerly looking for people, for lost people to come to a Savior that can save them from their sin, and He is waiting. It is almost like a picture of the Son standing up in heaven and saying, Father, just wait one more day. I know there's some more that will come to accept me as the King of Kings and the Lord of their life. It is not a coincidence that Methuselah is the oldest person in the Bible. It shows you that God is patient. He's patient with the people, but after him, judgment. He lives longer than anyone else. How long has God waited on you? Have you come to Jesus yet? He's been patient. You don't know what this afternoon holds for you. Surely don't know what tomorrow holds for you. Enoch had a relationship with God. He walked with Him for 300 years. He preached that his generation was more wicked and evil even than our generation, and that's hard to believe, but even in the wickedness and the evilness of his generation, he was still able to walk with God. That tells me that Todd Dotson can walk closer to God even in the temptation of 2016. And you can too. It's not impossible to live a life dedicated to a holy God. Look in Colossians. We're moving to Colossians. Just take your finger out of there. We're not coming back to Genesis today. But look in Colossians, just a few things, a few more verses to bring this, to wrap this up. Colossians chapter 1, verse 9. This goes along with walking with. For this reason also, since the day we heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of His will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. So Paul says that there's a prayer. What is the prayer? This would be good to know. What's this prayer that Paul's prayed? So that you will walk in a manner worthy. What is the manner? The manner is worthy. What is worthy? Pleasing to God. What was Enoch to God? Enoch was pleasing. He was dedicated. He wanted to be closer to God than any other person in the world. And that's how he lived his life. We are to live a life pleasing to God. We're not to live a life pleasing to a group at the church. We're not to live a life pleasing to a group of people at work. We're not to live a life pleasing to people we thought were our friends. We are to live a life pleasing to who? God. Verse 10, to please Him in all respects. What does that mean? How do you live a life that is pleasing to God? Well, he finishes it up. Thank you very much, Paul. Bearing fruit. Bear fruit. And patience. Joyously be patient. So bear fruit, increase in knowledge, joyously giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in, oh my goodness, who has qualified us to share in the inheritance. I'm missing that. Qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. Do you realize what you are qualified as a believer in Jesus Christ? As a believer in God's Son, what you are to share in? You are to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. Boy, you don't look like people that just inherited all the whole world. You don't look like people that just inherited heaven. You don't look like people who have just inherited more than Solomon ever had. The galaxy, the universe, the heavens declare His glory, and they are in your inheritance. You don't need a 401k. You've got God's promise. Boy, if you were Pentecostal, you'd be doing cartwheels down the aisles right now. You'd be fighting over each other. He says, this is pleasing to God. Ephesians. Look at Ephesians chapter 4. Back just a few pages there. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17. So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles do. Gentiles means the lost people. That was you. You were lost once. Now you're found. Don't walk as the world. Don't walk as the world, he says. So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the world also walks, in the futility of their mind. Paul says, stop living like sinners, walk pleasing to God. It's a shame that people in the church want to look and act like the world. Amen. How many of you have seen a Thomas Kinkade painting? You probably all have. They probably still sell them in Lifeway. You can find them if you don't think you have, you probably have seen one. Thomas Kinkade was famous for putting Christian symbols, doing Christian paintings, really just natural setting or something. But the natural setting, it would have some kind of, he would hide things in the painting. He would put a letter N somewhere in the painting for his wife, who was Nancy. He would put that letter in there for her, to honor her. He would put the picture of an eagle or a dove in honor of God, to be a symbolic of God. He would put that in his painting somewhere. But do you know how Thomas Kinkade died? Thomas Kinkade died a drunk and on drugs and living with his girlfriend after he had left his wife. He's wrecked his testimony. He has wrecked his testimony. Just living like the world wrecks your testimony. Paul says, stop it. Don't live like the world. Chapter 5, verse 2 is the last one. And walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. The first part of that verse, he says, walk in love. That means quit walking around with a sour look on your face. Quit walking around angry and mad because you have an inheritance that is greater than anybody else on this planet that is promised for you in heaven. Start living like a child of the light. We are to be light in a dark world. You are. Do you not realize? Man, I tell you what, castles. I'm mesmerized by seeing castles, old castles. I just wonder what king lived there. What king and queen, What did they do? Did they have sword fights out there? Did they slay dragons? Did they go out there and climb walls? Did they have, joust and all that good medieval festival things that go on? Did they partake in that? As you look at these castles, just, man, if those walls could talk, do you know, because kings and queens lived there. How did the servants, how did the ladies, the maidens, the people that helped the king and the prince and all those, how did those people live? What did they get to do all day? Do you know that you are the son and a daughter of the King of Kings? Not just an earthly king that had a stone castle, but you are the son and daughter of the King of Kings who has a heavenly throne and a mansion. But yet we want to live and walk around as if the world is all there is for us. We look for hope. We look to be fulfilled by the things of the world. We need to walk in a manner that is pleasing to God. You can do it. Who did it? Enoch did it in a day that is worse than today. Enoch proved that he could do it, so I know I can do it too. And you as well. Let's pray. Father, maybe there is one here this morning that's tired of walking in the way of the world, that is ready to move past that wants to be a new